He was a man forged in the crucible of war, a guardian shaped by fire and shadow, now seeking sanctuary in the silent cathedrals of the Pacific Northwest. Elias Thorne had traded the suffocating heat of the desert for the damp, clean breath of the pines, the cacophony of conflict for the rhythmic whisper of the wind through ancient firs. His only companion was Odin, a Belgian Malinois whose amber eyes held the same quiet intensity, the same unwavering loyalty that defined Elias himself. Together, they were protectors of a peace they had earned 1,000 times over. They moved through the fog-draped mountains, not as master and animal, but as two halves of a single, vigilant soul, searching for a quiet that the world of men had refused to grant them. But the peace they had so carefully constructed was a fragile thing, a thin sheet of ice over a deep, cold darkness. He was a protector who had laid down his arms, a weapon searching for a purpose beyond the kill. What he unearthed was a secret buried so deep it threatened to bring the entire mountain crashing down. The killer was already on the hill, and he had a cop and her K9 partner trapped in a place where no one could hear them scream. Tell us where you are watching from in the world today, and know that we are praying for you and your family. The sound was wrong. It wasn't the sharp crack of a falling branch or the distant boom of thunder rolling in from the coast. It was a dry, surgical snap, a sound that sliced through the ambient noise of the forest and set every nerve in Elias's body alight. Odin's head came up instantly, a low growl vibrating deep in his chest. His ears, two perfect triangles of black-tipped fur, swiveled, locking onto the direction of the disturbance. Elias laid a calming hand on the dog's powerful neck, his own senses stretching out, tasting the air, sifting through the layers of sound. He had spent a lifetime learning the language of violence, and this was a dialect he knew intimately. Suppressed gunfire, high velocity, professional. He didn't move for a full minute, letting the forest settle around them, letting the echo of the sound die completely. His mind, once a finely tuned instrument for battlefield calculus, slipped back into its old rhythms. Distance, approximately 2 clicks. Elevation, lower, down in the valley where the old logging road snaked its way toward the pass. He felt no fear, only a cold, concentrated clarity that pushed aside the fog of his hard-won peace. This was his sanctuary, and it had been violated. A trespass had occurred, not against property, but against principle. The principle of peace. The principle of protection. He gave Odin a silent command, a slight pressure behind the ear, and the dog relaxed, the growl ceasing, replaced by a tense, focused readiness. They moved, not with haste, but with a terrifying, fluid grace that consumed the ground without a sound. Elias's boots, worn and trusted, found purchase on the damp earth, avoiding the dry leaves and brittle twigs that would betray their presence. He moved like a ghost through the undergrowth, his profile low, his breathing controlled, a perfect economy of motion honed by years of operating where a single mistake meant death. The world of men, with its politics and its paychecks and its petty betrayals, had faded away. Out here, there was only the mission. He didn't know what the mission was yet, but his body knew the steps: secure the perimeter, assess the threat, neutralize or extract, protect the innocent. He was a guardian once more. The air grew heavier as they descended, thick with the smell of pine and damp soil, but underneath it, something else, a faint, acrid tang. Cordite. The scent of it was a key, unlocking a part of his mind he had tried so hard to keep closed. He saw flashes of dust-choked alleys, felt the phantom recoil of his rifle against his shoulder. He pushed it down. That was then. This was now. He was a weapon without a target, a protector without a charge. That was about to change. He crested a small ridge, dropping to one knee behind a curtain of ferns. Below him, nestled in a tight curve of the logging road, was a scene of stark, controlled violence. A county sheriff's vehicle, its blue and white paint looking jarringly out of place against the deep greens and browns of the forest, was stopped at an angle. The driver's side door was open, riddled with a tight grouping of bullet holes. The glass was shattered but not blown out, suggesting the rounds had been subsonic. Elias scanned the scene, his eyes missing nothing. The lack of brass casings on the road, the deliberate pattern of the shots, the drag marks leading from the driver's door into the dense woods on the far side. This wasn't a random shooting. This was an ambush, an execution, and it was clinical. Odin whined softly, his nose twitching, catching a scent on the wind that Elias couldn't. The scent of blood, the scent of fear, the scent of another dog. Elias gave the silent command again, and they moved down the slope, two shadows detaching themselves from the larger darkness of the woods, descending into a kill box that was not yet cold. He was no longer a man seeking peace. He was an operator, and he was on the hunt. The tracks told a story of desperation and discipline. Two sets of prints. One was a standard-issue patrol boot, the tread worn, slipping in the mud, denoting haste and probable injury. The other set of prints, alongside the first, belonged to a K9, the claws digging deep into the soft earth, a clear sign of a dog pulling, protecting, perhaps even dragging its partner to safety. Elias knelt, his fingers hovering over the impressions in the mud. He could read the narrative as clearly as if it were written on a page. The officer, a woman judging by the stride and boot size, had been wounded at the vehicle. She was losing blood, the intermittent dark droplets on the ferns confirming his suspicion. Her partner, a large German shepherd or Malinois by the size of the paw prints, was loyal to a fault, staying by her side, its body a shield. Elias closed his eyes for a second, filtering the information. The attacker's tracks were harder to find, but they were there, a single set. The boots were expensive, tactical, the tread pattern clean and deep. This person moved with confidence, with patience. He wasn't chasing. He was stalking, herding his prey toward a pre-selected location, a place where he could finish the job cleanly, away from the road. Elias rose, his movements economical and precise. He and Odin began to follow the trail, not directly on top of it, but parallel, using the dense cover of the forest to mask their approach. Every snapped twig, every rustle of leaves ahead, was a potential data point. The forest was no longer a sanctuary. It was a tactical map, a three-dimensional battle space of interlocking fields of fire, cover, and concealment. He felt the familiar ice-cold focus settle over him, a state of heightened awareness that was both a gift and a curse. In this state, he was more than a man. He was an instrument of pure, unadulterated purpose. The world simplified into threats and non-threats, targets and assets. He was moving toward the sound of a slow, unfolding tragedy, and his only thought was how to rewrite the ending. The trail led them down into a narrow, rocky ravine where a small creek cut through the landscape. The sound of running water would mask noise, an intelligent choice for a final engagement area. The air was colder here, the light dimmer, It felt like a tomb. Odin suddenly froze, his body rigid, a nearly inaudible growl rumbling in his throat. He wasn't looking down the ravine, but up, at the ridge to their left. Elias followed his gaze. Nothing, just trees and shadow. But Odin saw more, sensed more. He trusted the dog's instincts more than his own eyes. The stalker wasn't behind his prey. He was ahead, above them, controlling the high ground, waiting. He had them penned in. Elias changed his approach instantly. He was no longer tracking the victims. He was hunting the hunter. He gave Odin a series of quiet hand signals. Circle wide, stay low, silent approach. The dog understood perfectly, melting into the underbrush like a wisp of smoke. Elias unslung the rifle he always carried on long treks into the backcountry. It was a civilian, sporting rifle, but in his hands it was as deadly as any military-grade weapon. He chambered a round, the soft click of the bolt seeming deafeningly loud in the tense silence. He was a protector, and the flock was just ahead. He moved with the patience of a glacier, his eyes scanning the ridgeline, looking for the flicker of unnatural movement, the glint of a scope, the outline of a man who did not belong. The ravine was a kill box, and the shooter had the best seat in the house. But the shooter didn't know there was a second predator in his woods, a guardian who had come to reclaim his sanctuary. They found her huddled behind a large, moss-covered boulder near the creek's edge. Officer Maya Ramirez was propped against the cold stone, her face pale and beaded with sweat, her uniform torn and stained dark with blood at the shoulder. Her service pistol was in her hand, but it trembled with a mixture of pain and exhaustion. At her side, a magnificent German shepherd with a thick black and tan coat stood guard, its lips curled back in a silent, menacing snarl. The dog's name was Zeus, and he was bleeding from a shallow graze along his flank, but his eyes were fixed on the ridge above, his entire being a defiant barrier between his partner and the danger that lurked there. He was a guardian in his own right, a protector made of fur and fury. Elias saw the whole picture in a heartbeat. The officer was losing consciousness. The dog was steadfast, but wounded. The shooter on the ridge was patient, probably waiting for full dark or for the officer to make a mistake. He was toying with them. Elias made a low clicking sound with his tongue, a signal he and Odin had practiced 1,000 times. It was a sound of non-aggression, of calm presence. Zeus's head snapped toward them, the snarl deepening into a full-throated growl. Odin, who had circled around from the other side, remained perfectly still, a statue of coiled power, showing no aggression, merely presence. He was communicating in a language only the dogs understood. We are not the threat. Elias stayed low, keeping a thicket of ferns between himself and the officer, not wanting to startle her. "Officer," he said, his voice low and calm, not much more than a whisper carried on the wind. "My name is Elias. I'm here to help." Maya's head jerked up, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and suspicion. She raised her pistol, the muzzle wavering unsteadily. "Show yourself! Drop your weapon!" He could hear the training in her voice, but it was frayed, stretched thin by pain and adrenaline. "I can't do that," Elias replied, his tone even. "The man on the ridge will kill us both if I do. I'm on your side. My partner is with me." He gave a soft whistle. Odin padded silently out from the shadows, his head low, his tail neutral. He stopped a respectful distance away from Zeus, sat down, and looked at the other dog, a clear gesture of de-escalation. Zeus's growl softened. his posture losing some of its rigidity. He recognized a professional. He recognized an ally. Maya watched the interaction between the two dogs, her brows furrowed in confusion. The sight of this calm, powerful man and his equally disciplined dog appearing out of nowhere felt like a hallucination, a fever dream brought on by blood loss. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice raspy. "I'm the man who's going to get you out of here," Elias said simply. He slid a compact medkit from his pack, pushing it slowly across the damp ground toward her. "The shooter on the ridge is a pro. He's patient. He's waiting for an easy shot. We're not going to give it to him. But first, you need to stop that bleeding." The authority in his voice was absolute, cutting through her pain and fear. It was the voice of a man who had stood in the crossfire before, a man who saw this kill box not as a tomb, but as a problem to be solved. She looked from his unseen position in the ferns to the calm Malinois, then to her own loyal partner. She was a cop. She was trained to trust no one. But her instincts, the ones that had kept her alive this long, were screaming at her that this man, this ghost in the woods, was her only hope. The sanctuary had sent a guardian, and for the first time in hours, a flicker of hope ignited in the cold darkness of the ravine. "He works for Julian Croft," Maya rasped, her voice tight with pain as Elias expertly applied a pressure dressing to the gunshot wound in her shoulder. His hands were steady and sure, his touch impersonal yet deeply reassuring. He worked in silence, his focus absolute, the grim set of his jaw the only indication of the gravity of their situation. Odin and Zeus lay a few feet away, a silent council of war, their combined presence a warm, living shield against the cold fear that permeated the ravine. "I was on patrol, got a call about a disabled vehicle up on the pass," she continued, speaking in short, breathless bursts. "It was a setup. I walked into it. The man, the shooter, he wasn't there to rob me. He was there to silence me." Elias finished with the bandage, securing it tightly. "Silence you about what?" His dialogue was economical, direct. Every word was a tool to gather information. "Croft, CEO of Aegis Dynamics. They have a big research facility just outside of town, supposedly working on next-gen agricultural tech. It's a front." She took a shaky breath, her eyes locking onto his. "They're weaponizing agricultural drones, small, undetectable, capable of delivering lethal chemical payloads. I got a tip from an insider, a scientist with a conscience. He gave me a data drive. I was on my way to meet a federal contact when—" She gestured vaguely toward the road, toward the ambush. The cleaner showed up. Elias absorbed the information, his face a mask of stone. Julian Croft, he knew the name. A tech billionaire, a philanthropist on the surface, a man who bought his way into every level of politics and industry. A man whose public legacy was built on a foundation of secrets. This went far beyond a simple cop being targeted. This was corporate warfare bleeding into the real world. "The data drive?" Elias asked, his voice low. Maya nodded toward a small, waterproof pouch still clipped to her duty belt. "It's all there. The specs, the test results, Croft's direct authorization. Everything." Elias gave a short, sharp nod. The mission parameters had just crystallized. This was no longer just an extraction. It was now about asset protection. The asset was Maya. The objective was the data drive. The threat was the professional on the ridge. And behind him, the true enemy, a wealthy, arrogant villain who believed he was untouchable. "What's his name?" "The shooter," Elias asked, his eyes scanning the ridgeline, already formulating a plan. "Silas," Maya whispered, a shiver running through her despite the humid air. The insider called him Croft's ghost. He makes problems disappear. Elias felt a flicker of something akin to recognition. A ghost, an operator, a man like him, but one who had chosen a different path, a protector who served a legacy of greed instead of a code of honor. He looked at the two dogs, loyal and pure in their duty. He looked at the wounded officer, a woman who had stumbled into a cage far bigger than this ravine. His purpose, which had been a quiet hum beneath the surface of his search for peace, was now a roaring fire. He wasn't just a guardian of this mountain. He was a guardian of the truth. He would not fail. "All right, Officer Ramirez," he said, his voice imbued with a chilling certainty. "Here's what we're going to do." He began to speak, his words short, sharp, and precise, outlining a plan that was both audacious and deadly. He was no longer just a man with a rifle. He was a weapon, and he was finally aimed at a target. The forest was about to remember the true meaning of the word predator. The hunt began not with a bang, but with a whisper. Elias moved away from the relative safety of the boulder, melting back into the deep shadows of the forest. Odin, a seamless extension of his own movement. He left Maya with a single, stark instruction. "When you hear the dogs, move to the creek. Stay in the water. It will cover your sound and scent. Don't stop until you reach the waterfall a half-mile down." He was giving her a path to escape, but it was also a feint. The real battle would be fought here, in this ravine, between two men who were masters of their deadly craft. Silas, the ghost, would be expecting his prey to run. He would not be expecting one of them to turn and fight back with such ferocious intent. Elias moved in a wide, sweeping arc, climbing the steep side of the ravine opposite the one Silas occupied. It was a grueling, vertical ascent, forcing him to use roots and rocks as handholds, but he climbed with the tireless strength of a man driven by absolute purpose. Odin moved ahead of him, scouting, his paws finding silent purchase where a man's boots would slip. They were a team, a perfect synthesis of human intellect and animal instinct. From this new vantage point, looking down on Silas's presumed position, the tactical landscape shifted. The kill box was no longer a box. It was a fluid, dynamic environment. Elias was now the guardian of the high ground. He settled into a sniper's nest of his own, a natural hollow between two ancient cedars, his rifle resting on a bed of moss. He scanned the opposite ridge, his eyes tracing every shadow, every cluster of ferns. He wasn't looking for a man. He was looking for a disruption in the pattern of the forest, a patch of darkness that was too uniform, a branch that swayed when there was no wind. He felt the world slow down, the background noise fading until all that remained was his own steady breathing and the beat of his heart. This was his element, the fog of civilian life, the quiet pain of memories he couldn't outrun. All of it burned away in the ice-cold fire of the hunt. He was a protector, and Silas was a wolf in his sanctuary. He would be removed. He found him, a flicker of movement, barely perceptible. Silas was shifting his position, moving to a new hide, likely one with a better angle on the boulder where Maya had been. The man was patient, methodical, good. Patience could be used against him. Elias didn't take the shot. A long-distance rifle duel would be a battle of chance, of windage and elevation. He preferred certainty. He preferred to bring the fight in close, where skill and will were the only variables that mattered. He raised a small silver whistle to his lips. It was custom-made, its pitch so high it was nearly inaudible to human ears, but a clear, piercing command to Odin. He blew a short, complex series of notes. It was a call he had developed in the mountains of Afghanistan, a command that meant create chaos. On the other side of the ravine, Odin, who had been lying in wait, sprang into action. He was a blur of black fur, a phantom predator crashing through the undergrowth, barking and snarling with the ferocity of a whole pack. Simultaneously, down by the creek, Zeus, hearing the signal and understanding his role, began to bark as well, his deep-chested roars echoing off the ravine walls. The sudden, violent eruption of sound was disorienting, designed to overload the senses. To Silas, it would sound as if he were being flanked from multiple directions. It was the opening move in a deadly game of chess, and Elias had just put the ghost in check. The chaos was a meticulously crafted illusion. As Silas's attention was drawn by the ferocious sounds from Odin on his flank and Zeus below, Elias slipped from his overwatch position, moving with breathtaking speed down the slope. He was no longer the sniper. He was the assault element. The first contact was a symphony of controlled violence. Silas, momentarily distracted by Odin's aggressive feint to his left, turned his rifle in that direction, his professional instincts screaming at him to address the most immediate threat. It was the fractional mistake Elias had been counting on. Emerging from the creek bed like a vengeful spirit, Elias didn't fire. He threw. A small, heavy rock, hurled with practiced precision, struck the cliff face a few feet above Silas's head, sending a shower of pebbles and dirt down onto his position. It was a primitive tactic, but brutally effective. Silas flinched, instinctively looking up, his focus now split between 3 points of contact: the dog on his flank, the sound from above, and the wounded cop he believed was still hiding below. In that sliver of a second, Elias closed the distance. He moved with a speed that was utterly inhuman, crossing the rocky creek bed in 3 silent bounds. Silas spun back around, bringing his rifle to bear, but he was too late. Elias was already inside his arc of fire. The fight was short, nasty, and brutally efficient. Elias's first move was to parry the rifle, his hand striking the barrel and deflecting it skyward as a single, suppressed round hissed harmlessly into the canopy above. His other hand, balled into a fist, struck Silas just below the sternum, a concussive blow that drove the air from his lungs in a choked gasp. Silas was a professional, not a thug. He recovered instantly, abandoning the rifle and drawing a combat knife from a sheath on his chest rig. The blade, black and non-reflective, arced toward Elias's ribs. Elias moved like water, flowing around the attack, his hand clamping down on Silas's wrist, twisting it at an unnatural angle. Bone grated. Silas grunted in pain, but didn't cry out. He used the momentum to drive an elbow toward Elias's face. Elias took the blow on his shoulder, absorbing the impact, and responded with a vicious headbutt that sent a starburst of pain through both their skulls. They broke apart, circling each other in the dim light of the ravine. 2 apex predators who spoke the same language of violence. Silas's left arm hung uselessly at his side, his wrist clearly broken. But his eyes burned with cold, professional rage. He still held the knife in his right hand. "You're not a cop," Silas rasped, spitting a wad of blood onto the stones. "Who the hell are you?" Elias didn't answer. His name didn't matter. His past didn't matter. He was a guardian. He was a protector. He was the consequence Julian Croft had never anticipated. As if on cue, Odin appeared on the ridge above them, a silent, menacing silhouette against the darkening sky. On the other side of the creek, Zeus stood his ground, a low growl hissing from his throat. Silas was trapped between them, man, dog, and purpose. It was a tactical problem he couldn't solve. He saw the chilling certainty in Elias's eyes and knew this was not a fight he could win. With a snarl of frustration, Silas threw a small pellet to the ground. It erupted in a thick cloud of white smoke, a professional's escape hatch. By the time the smoke cleared, he was gone, a ghost fading back into the trees, leaving only the faint scent of cordite and the lingering echo of his failure. Elias didn't pursue. Silas was wounded, his primary weapon lost. He was no longer a hunter. He was prey, and he was leaving a blood trail. The power dynamic had been irrevocably shattered. The real target was not the ghost, but the man who had sent him. The opulent Seattle penthouse was a cage of glass and steel, suspended 50 stories above the city mist. Julian Croft stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of obscenely expensive whiskey in his hand, watching the distant lights of the ferries glide across Puget Sound. He was a master of this universe, a man who saw the world not as a home, but as a balance sheet. People were assets or liabilities. Principles were commodities to be bought and sold. His legacy was the only thing that mattered, a towering edifice built on secrets and ruthlessness. His satellite phone buzzed, the encrypted signal a familiar intrusion. He answered it, his voice calm, laced with the casual arrogance of a man who had never faced a true consequence in his life. "Report," he said, not bothering with a greeting. Silas's voice on the other end was strained, tight with pain, and something Croft wasn't used to hearing from his ghost. Uncertainty. "There's a complication." Croft swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "Complications are what I pay you to eliminate, Silas. Is the asset secured?" He referred to the data drive, the small piece of technology that could unravel his entire empire. "Negative. The target, the officer. She has help," Silas said. The words clipped. "He's not local, not law enforcement. He's a professional, military, special operator by the look of it. And he has a K9, Malinois, fully trained." Croft was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the city below. He despised surprises. They were an indicator of sloppiness, a variable he couldn't control. "One man? You are telling me that one man and his dog are preventing you from completing a simple retrieval and sanitation contract?" The condescension in his voice was a weapon in itself. "He's not just one man," Silas shot back, a hint of anger coloring his tone. "He's good. Too good. He broke my wrist. I lost my primary rifle. He anticipated my position, used the terrain, used his animal as a force multiplier. This is not what we planned for." Julian Croft took a slow sip of his whiskey, the smooth burn a familiar comfort. He processed the information, stripping it of Silas's excuses and emotions. A new player had entered the game, an unknown variable. This was interesting. He felt a flicker of something that was almost excitement. For years, his battles had been fought in boardrooms, with lawyers and leveraged buyouts. This was different. This was primal. "Your incompetence is noted, Silas," Croft said coolly. "But it may have presented an opportunity. This operator, he is a loose end. But he is also a test. Our project, the one this data drive exposes, is designed to be the ultimate tool of deniable conflict. to be a true guardian of my legacy. Perhaps this is the field test we needed. What are you saying? Silas asked, his breathing labored. I'm saying you are to re-engage. But not just you, Croft said, walking over to a polished mahogany desk. He touched a button on a secure console. I'm activating Asset 2 and Asset 3. They are 20 minutes out from your location in a Whisperhawk. Your new orders are not just to retrieve the drive and eliminate the officer. You are to hunt this protector. I want to know who he is. I want to see how he operates. And then, I want you to erase him and his dog from existence. He was escalating. He was turning a simple cleanup into a full-scale black operation. This lone operator in the woods was no longer just an obstacle. He had become a challenge to Croft's authority, to his sense of omnipotence. He was an impurity in the system, and Julian Croft's world had no room for impurities. Consider it done, Silas said, the pain in his voice replaced by a renewed, cold resolve. Croft ended the call and stared out at the city lights. He was a titan of industry, a shaper of the modern world. This lone warrior in the forest, this self-appointed guardian, was nothing. A ghost from a bygone era of honor and duty. He would be swept away like dust. Croft raised his glass in a silent toast to the empty air, to his own reflection in the glass, a protector of a forgotten code against the architect of the future. It was hardly a fair fight. The final confrontation was destined for the old Cascade logging camp, a skeleton of rusted machinery and decaying bunkhouses nestled in a basin by a roaring waterfall. It was the only defensible position for miles, a place where the jagged terrain and open spaces could be used to an advantage. Elias chose it deliberately. He was no longer evading. He was making a stand. He was turning the sanctuary into a fortress. Maya, her shoulder bandaged and her face set with grim determination, was positioned in the loft of the main mill building, armed with Elias's rifle. Her role was Overwatch. She was a cop, a good shot, and her eyes would be his. Zeus was with her, a silent, furry sentinel at her side. Elias and Odin were the ground element, the hammer to her anvil. They moved through the skeletal remains of the camp, using the debris and shadows as cover. The air was heavy with the mist from the waterfall, a constant, chilling spray that muffled sound and clung to everything. The hunt was over. The battle was about to begin. They didn't have to wait long. A silent black helicopter, a Whisperhawk, materialized out of the low-hanging clouds, its blades making only a soft, rhythmic slicing sound. It didn't land. 3 figures rappelled down with practiced speed, their forms dark and menacing against the grey sky. Silas, his arm in a crude sling, and 2 other operators clad in black tactical gear, their faces obscured by helmets and night vision goggles. Asset 2 and Asset 3, Croft's personal legion. They spread out, moving with the fluid, predatory grace of a wolf pack, sweeping the camp in a coordinated pattern. Elias watched them from his hiding spot behind the rusted hulk of a steam donkey engine. He analyzed their movements, their spacing, the way they covered each other. They were good, very good. But they had a weakness. They were relying on their technology, on their numbers, on the arrogant belief that they were the only predators in these woods. Elias gave Odin the silent command. Harass. Odin became a ghost. He moved through the labyrinth of decaying buildings, a fleeting shadow, a disembodied growl here, a flash of movement there. He wasn't attacking. Not yet. He was pulling their focus, stretching their formation, sowing seeds of uncertainty. While the three operators were distracted by the phantom dog, Elias moved. He circled behind them, a wraith in the mist, his knife now in his hand. He took down Asset 2 from behind, a swift, brutal, and silent takedown that was over before the man even knew he was in a fight. One down. Silas and Asset 3 spun around, sensing the change, their rifles up, scanning the swirling mist. "He's here," Silas yelled, his voice echoing eerily in the dead camp. "Find him." From the mill loft, Maya saw her shot. Asset 3 was momentarily silhouetted against a gap in the buildings. She took a breath, squeezed the trigger, and the rifle bucked against her good shoulder. The round hit the operator in the chest, the impact throwing him backward. His body armor stopped the bullet, but the kinetic force cracked his ribs and left him gasping for air, momentarily out of the fight. 2 down. Now it was just Silas, the ghost versus the guardian. Silas, enraged, fired a burst from his submachine gun toward the mill, the rounds splintering the old wood near Maya's position. It was a desperate, undisciplined act. He was rattled. That's when Elias emerged from the mist, not from behind, but directly in front of him, his face a mask of cold fury. The final fight was a maelstrom of violence. It wasn't about technique anymore. It was about will. They crashed into each other, Elias's raw strength against Silas's desperate ferocity. They slammed into the side of an old flatbed truck, the rusted metal groaning under their impact. Silas's knife flashed, and Elias caught his wrist, the same one he had broken before. Silas screamed in agony as Elias twisted, forcing him to drop the blade. Elias drove his knee into Silas's ribs, then followed with a series of precise, devastating strikes to his head and neck. Silas crumpled to the wet ground, his fight extinguished. It was over. But as Elias stood over the defeated mercenary, he heard the telltale whomp of a 40 mm grenade launcher. The round from Asset 3, who had recovered enough to get back in the fight, sailed over his head and slammed into the mill building. The structure erupted in a ball of flame and splintered wood. "Maya!" Elias roared, his heart lurching. The sanctuary was burning. The fire cast long, dancing shadows across the rain-slicked ground as Elias pulled Maya from the collapsing, burning mill. She was conscious, battered and bruised, but alive. Zeus followed close behind, his fur singed, but his spirit unbroken. Elias laid her down a safe distance away, his hands checking her for new injuries, his operator's focus shifting instantly back to triage, to protection. The immediate threat was neutralized. Silas and his team were either incapacitated or dead, but the victory felt hollow, the flames licking at the old wood, a stark reminder that this was only one battle in a much larger war. The evidence, the data drive, was safe in a pouch inside Elias's jacket. It was the key. It was the weapon that could dismantle Julian Croft's entire legacy of lies. As dawn broke, casting a pale grey light over the smouldering ruins of the logging camp, the sounds of official sirens grew closer. Elias had used Silas's satellite phone to make an anonymous call, directing state and federal authorities to their location, giving them just enough information to ensure Maya's safety and the integrity of the evidence. He couldn't stay. His world was one of shadows, and the harsh light of official investigations had no place for a man like him. He was a guardian, not a witness. His work was done here. For now. He looked at Maya, her face smudged with soot, but her eyes clear and filled with a profound gratitude. "They'll take care of you," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "Give them the drive. Tell them everything. Croft won't be able to hide from this. She reached out, her hand closing on his forearm. "Thank you," she whispered, the words carrying the weight of the life he had saved. "Who are you?" He gave her a small, sad smile. "Just a man walking his dog." He turned without another word, whistling softly for Odin. The two of them, the man and his loyal K9 partner, walked away from the destruction, disappearing back into the deep woods, swallowed by the morning mist. They had come to the mountains seeking sanctuary and had found a war. They left not with the peace they had sought, but with something more valuable, a renewed sense of purpose. Julian Croft was still out there, a king in his castle of glass, believing himself to be untouchable. But he was wrong. A protector was now on his trail, a relentless, incorruptible force who carried no badge and answered to no command but his own code. The fight for the soul of the sanctuary was over, but the hunt for the real monster had just begun. Elias and Odin moved through the silent trees, two guardians returning to the wild, their shared legacy not one of violence, but of unwavering protection for the innocent. Their quiet life was over, but their true mission was just beginning. Comment Amen below if you believe in the power of loyalty and protection. God bless you and your families.